10 years. 10 long years dedicated to a marriage I believed was as solid as a rock. My name is Mike, I'm 38, and until recently I was just an ordinary guy living a life that seemed perfectly normal. Driving long roads was more than just my job, it was my way of life. As a truck driver, I spent half of the past decade looking at the horizon through the windshield of my Peterbilt, while my thoughts were always on Sarah, waiting for me at our home in the Denver suburbs. The arrangement was simple. I traveled, worked hard, and sent money home. She took care of our life while I was away. No kids, a decision we both made early on because we figured my constant absence would make raising children too complicated. Every goodbye always followed the same ritual. I'd kiss Sarah, promise to be back soon, and she would smile and say, "I'll be here." And for years, that system worked perfectly, or so I thought. Subscribe to the channel and leave your like to get access to more stories like this. The changes were subtle at first. Almost unnoticeable. It was like watching something slowly lose its color in strong sunlight. Sarah's text started getting shorter. "Okay, all right, take care." Dry words, lacking life, without the emojis and hearts they used to have. When I got home after weeks on the road, her hug felt more mechanical. The kiss, which used to be long, became just a quick touch of lips. Nights that were once filled with endless conversations about my days on the road and hers at home turned into silences punctuated only by the sound of the TV. The stories I told about exotic places I'd been or interesting people I'd met were met with blank stares and automatic replies, "Cool, Mike," or "Interesting," with no further questions or interest in details. Intimacy was the next casualty. First, she started saying she was tired. Then, she mentioned headaches. Before long, she didn't even need an excuse, she'd just turn to the other side of the bed. I started wondering what was wrong with me. Had I changed? Gained too much weight? Been talking about boring stuff? I tried to change my behavior, buy her gifts, plan special moments. Nothing worked. The distance between us grew right along with my desperation to save our relationship. It was on a Wednesday night. My route had been cancelled because of a snowstorm in the Rockies, and I decided to take the chance to surprise Sarah. I didn't tell her I was coming back, I pictured her face lighting up when she saw me unexpectedly. What a fool I was. I parked a few houses away from our place, a habit I developed for surprises. When I opened the front door, I heard her voice coming from our upstairs bedroom. She was on the phone, and something in her tone made me stop. I crept silently toward the stairs, and then her words hit me like a bullet. "I can't just end it like this, Lisa. What am I going to do? Where will I live? Who's going to pay the bills? I haven't loved Mike in years, I can barely stand him when he's home, but I have to be practical." A pause. A bitter laugh. Of course he doesn't know. Mike lives in that fantasy world where we're the perfect couple. It's just convenient for me to keep things the way they are right now. My body froze. The world around me disappeared. My legs went weak, and I had to lean against the wall so I wouldn't fall. 10 years. 10 years of my life spent on someone who could hardly stand me. Who stayed with me purely out of convenience. Every hug, every kiss, every "I love you," all lies. My first instinct was to run upstairs, confront her, demand an explanation. But something stopped me. A strange calm took over as I silently backed away to the door. I left the house, closed the door quietly, and went back to my truck. I spent the whole night in a 24-hour diner parking lot, staring blankly at the wall as my coffee cooled. Her words repeated in my mind like a scratched record, "I haven't loved Mike in years." Years. How many? 2? 5? Our entire marriage? I went over in my head every moment I'd once thought was special. Our vacations in Florida. Our 5-year anniversary when I bought the necklace she'd always wanted. The nights we stayed up planning our future. Were they all made up? Had I been living a well-crafted lie? And then, something strange happened. Instead of feeling sad, I felt a wave of relief. It was as if an invisible weight was lifted off my shoulders. If she was only with me for financial security, if every smile was forced, every touch calculated, then none of it was real. And if nothing was real, I hadn't lost anything. At dawn, as I watched the sun rise through my truck's windshield, I made up my mind. If Sarah wanted convenience, I was going to take it all away from her. There would be no yelling, no tears, no explanations. I would just disappear. I drove to the bank as soon as it opened and withdrew half of our savings, leaving the other half for her, even though my anger told me otherwise. I cancelled my credit card and phone. I called my boss and quit, making up an excuse about health problems. Then, I went to our house at a time I knew Sarah was at work. Within 30 minutes, I packed only the essentials, some clothes, important documents, the watch I'd inherited from my father, and a couple of irreplaceable keepsakes. I left my wedding ring on our neatly made bed, the only sign that I'd been there and that I wasn't coming back. I left no note. There was nothing left to say that wasn't already spoken by the silence that had filled our years together. With my backpack over my shoulder and the truck keys in my pocket, I looked one last time at the house that would never be my home again. I closed the door behind me and got into my truck. The engine roared to life, and I drove off without looking back. My destination? Anywhere she couldn't find me. Texas seemed like a good option, big enough for me to get lost, far enough away to start over. Texas welcomed me with its dry heat and horizons that seemed to stretch forever. I chose a small town called Millbrook, with a population just over 5,000, where no one knew me and no one asked too many questions. I rented a small apartment on the east side, near a mechanic's shop. Nothing luxurious, just a living room with an open kitchen, a simple bedroom, and a bathroom. But it was mine. All mine. For the first few weeks, I slept with the lights on, haunted by nightmares where I'd hear Sarah repeating those cruel words. I'd wake up sweating, instinctively reaching for the empty side of the bed. But over time, the sleepless nights dwindled. The empty space beside me started to feel like not an absence, but a freedom. I found work at a local grocery store as a stocker. The pay was modest compared to what I'd made as a trucker, but it was enough for my new life. The owner, an old man named Frank, was a man of few words but had a big heart. When he asked about my past, I just said vaguely that I was starting over after a tough divorce. He nodded like he understood perfectly and never brought it up again. "Everyone deserves a fresh start, son," he said, handing me the keys to the storeroom. That simple phrase stuck with me, replaying in my mind in the most unexpected moments. Little by little, I began to rediscover who I was without the pressure of being Sarah's husband. I realized that for years I had molded my personality to fit her expectations. I used to love fishing, but I stopped because she thought it was boring. I loved country music, but hardly listened because she said all the songs sounded the same. Even my beard, which I now let grow freely, had been kept short because Sarah preferred a clean-shaven face. In Millbrook, I started reclaiming those little parts of me that had been suppressed. I bought a fishing rod and began spending Sunday afternoons at the local lake. I tuned my radio to country stations. I let my beard grow long enough to almost touch my chest. Every one of these choices, trivial as they might seem, was an act of liberation for me. My routine became simple, but truly my own. I'd wake up early, make a strong coffee, work at the store until dusk. On Fridays, I'd treat myself to dinner at the only restaurant in town, a small family place serving the best steak and potatoes I ever had. On Wednesday nights, I'd go to a little bar called Crossroads, where a group of local musicians played for anyone willing to listen. It was at one of those spots that I met Ray, a retired mechanic who became my first true friend in years. Ray was a simple man who said little, but when he spoke, his words carried the weight of experience. One night, while we shared a bottle of cheap bourbon, he said something that changed my perspective. "You know, Mike, some people spend their whole lives faking. They fake loving, faking caring, faking happiness. But the truth is, there's no perfect act. Your body always knows when you're lying. And eventually, the lie always comes with a price. I thought about Sarah, about how her body had started to resist my touch long before her words revealed the truth. How her eyes didn't light up anymore when I walked in the door. How her smile seemed calculated, like she was posing for a picture instead of feeling real joy. "How do you know when it's not just faking anymore?" I asked Ray. He smiled, that kind of smile only years of experience can bring. "When you stop wondering if it's real." And right there, in that simple bar, with bourbon burning my throat, I realized for the first time in years that I wasn't questioning the reality around me anymore. I wasn't trying to decode hidden meanings in every word or gesture. I was just living. And that, in itself, was freeing. As the months passed, my life took on a new shape. I started volunteering to teach basic mechanics at the local school after the principal saw me fixing Frank's car in the grocery store parking lot. The kids started calling me a Mr. Beard, and, although their endless questions sometimes left me exhausted, there was something invigorating about sharing what I knew without expecting anything back. I also began helping out with maintenance at the small community center on Saturdays. That's where I met Elena, a middle-aged literature teacher who ran a book club. She lent me books I'd never have considered reading, Hemingway, Steinbeck, even some poems. I discovered I liked stories about ordinary guys facing extraordinary challenges. Maybe because, in some way, I saw myself in them. In 6 months, I had built a completely new life. A life with no pretensions, no big luxuries, but also no lies. People accepted me for who I was, not for what I could provide. The conversations were genuine, with no hidden agendas. The friendships, though few, ran deep. And the most surprising thing, for the first time in years, I felt completely at peace. There was no more constant anxiety, no more feeling like I was always trying to please someone who would never feel satisfied. There was no need to read between the lines or decode secret signals. What people said was just what they felt. Sometimes, of course, I thought about Sarah. About the good times we once shared at the start, before convenience had replaced love. I wondered how she reacted to my disappearance. Whether she was relieved or desperate. Whether she tried to look for me or simply moved on, happy to finally be rid of the man who could hardly stand her. But those thoughts became less frequent and less intense as the months went by. Sarah started to seem like a character from a book I'd read long ago, familiar, yet distant. A part of my story that was no longer the main focus. And then, when I least expected it, when I had finally settled into my new life, the past came looking for me. It was just an ordinary Tuesday. I had finished my shift at the grocery store and was walking home, stopping briefly to grab a coffee at the local gas station, like I did every afternoon. I picked up my cell phone to check my messages, a habit I kept even though my number was now different and only my new friends knew it. That's when I saw it. An email from an address I immediately recognized. Sarah. My heart raced, and for a moment I felt back at that fateful night, standing at the bottom of the stairs listening to my life crumble. The subject was simple: please, read. I hesitated for several minutes before opening it. How had she found me? And why now, after almost a year? The message was long, emotional, filled with words that once meant everything to me. Mike, I'm not sure if you'll read this, but I have to try. I've spent the last few months desperately searching for you. I hired detectives, combed through hospitals, and reached out to all your friends and family. No one knew where you were. Some even thought you might be dead. I nearly lost my mind thinking of the worst. I know what you heard that night. Lisa told me that you called her, asking if she knew where I was. She said you sounded strange, distant. That's when I realized what had happened. You overheard our conversation. Words that should never have been said, let alone heard by you. I have no excuse for what I said. I was confused, unhappy with my own life, and I blamed you for it. But since you disappeared, I've come to see how foolish I was. How good we were together. How much I miss you. Please, Mike, let's talk. We can fix this. I can fix it. Tell me where you are, and I'll come to get you. Or better yet, come home. Your home. Our home. I love you more than ever. Sarah. I read the message over and over, trying to find some hint of what was really behind those words. Was it genuine regret or just another attempt at manipulation? True love or desperation from losing her safety net? I didn't reply. I didn't know what to say. Part of me, a deep part one thought was buried, still cared about Sarah. I didn't want her to suffer. But another part, wiser and stronger from time apart, knew this wasn't love. It was dependency. A fear of being alone. Maybe even guilt. In the days that followed, more emails arrived. Then came texts to my new number. She must have gotten it from some distant relative I still kept in touch with. And then, calls. Her voice on the voicemails sounded desperate, tearful. Mike, please, give me a chance to explain. I miss you so much. Our home feels empty without you. I can't sleep knowing you're out there, thinking I don't love you. It felt like someone was trying to drag me back into a dream I'd already woken from. Every message from her left me exhausted, as if it was sapping the energy I'd just found. Then, one Sunday morning, while I was quietly fishing at the local lake, I heard footsteps approaching. I recognized the sound before I even turned my head. The light shuffle, the familiar rhythm. Some habits are impossible to forget when you've lived with someone for so long. Mike. Her voice was almost a whisper, as if she feared that speaking too loudly might make me disappear again. I turned slowly. There she was, standing just a few meters away. Sarah. She looked different. Thinner, with deep dark circles under her eyes and hair that no longer shone like I remembered. She was wearing a simple dress I hadn't seen before. She seemed as out of place in that rural setting as I would feel in our old suburban life. How did you find me? I asked, keeping my tone even though my heart pounded. I never stopped looking for you, she answered, taking a hesitant step forward. A detective finally found records of your new job. I took the first flight as soon as I found out. I nodded, processing the news. A part of me always knew that this day would come. Maybe I was even waiting for it, to finally close this chapter of my life. You look different, she said, her eyes taking in my beard, my simple clothes, my relaxed stance. I'm just being myself, I replied simply. Then she started crying, big silent tears rolling down her face. In another time, I would have rushed to comfort her. Now, I just watched, feeling a strange disconnect. It was like watching a scene from a movie that once meant so much but now belonged to another life. Mike, I made the biggest mistake of my life, she said between sobs. Those things I said, they weren't true. I was just frustrated, spouting nonsense to Lisa. You know how she is, always pushing me to complain. But I love you. I always have. I kept fishing as she spoke, casting my line into the calm water of the lake. There was something soothing about the repetitive motion, cast, wait, real. Simple. Honest. Sarah, I finally said after a long silence. You didn't come here because you love me. You came because your life got tougher without me around. That's not true, she protested, coming closer. I miss you so much. The house is so empty without you. I can't sleep right, I can't focus at work. And the bills? I asked calmly. Were you able to pay them all by yourself? She hesitated for just a second, but that was enough. I knew Sarah too well not to notice when she was calculating her next words. That doesn't matter, she finally said. What matters is that we need each other. We're a family, Mike. I reeled in my line one last time and began packing up my fishing gear. The sun was already high, and I had promised to help Frank with a new shipment that afternoon. No, Sarah. We were two people living under the same roof. You stayed with me out of convenience, and I stayed for an illusion. That's not family. Sarah followed me to my apartment, a steady flow of words tumbling out, promises, memories, plans for the future. I opened the door and, for a moment, saw my life through her eyes, the small, simple apartment, the few pieces of furniture, the lack of the luxuries our house in Denver once had. I could see judgment in her eyes, barely concealed pity. "You can stay here tonight," she said, pointing toward the couch. "Tomorrow we can talk more." She seemed relieved, as if every minute with me was a small victory. I noticed her eye scanning every corner of the apartment, probably looking for signs of another woman. The thought nearly made me smile. Not once during this year apart had I even thought about starting a new relationship. I was too busy rediscovering who I was. That night, while Sarah slept on the couch, I sat on the porch, looking up at the stars burning bright in the Texas sky. I thought about our life together, the good times we once shared, the promises we made. And then I thought about the man I was now, calmer, more centered, truer to myself. I had made up my mind long before Sarah showed up in Millbrook. In fact, I decided that night when I heard the truth slip out of her lips. But now, with her sleeping just a few meters away, I knew I finally had to say it out loud. In the morning, I made coffee for both of us. Sarah appeared in the kitchen looking hopeful, her hair neatly done, with a touch of makeup on. She smiled when she saw me placing 2 cups on the table. "You always made the best coffee," she said, trying to sound casual, as if it was just another morning in our shared life. We sat in silence for a few minutes. Finally, I set my cup down and looked her in the eyes. "I'm going back to Denver with you," I said. Her face lit up instantly, a genuine smile breaking through for the first time since she arrived. "Oh, Mike. I knew you'd understand. We can start over, do it differently this time. I promise that." I raised my hand, cutting her off. "I'm only going back to finalize our divorce and settle our affairs. I'm not coming back to our marriage, Sarah." Her smile vanished as quickly as it had appeared. Her eyes filled with tears again, but this time I saw something different in them, not just sadness, but anger. "Is it because of someone else?" she asked, her voice suddenly cold. I shook my head. "There isn't anyone else. This past year was about me, not about finding a replacement for you." "Then why?" she insisted, her voice rising a notch. "Why can't we try again? People make mistakes, Mike. I made a terrible mistake, but that doesn't mean our whole marriage was a lie." I sipped my coffee, taking a moment to gather my thoughts. "Sarah, when you say you miss me, what exactly do you miss? My company? Our conversations? Or the security I provided? The home I kept, the bills I paid, the life I built for us?" She started to protest, but I continued, "Think about it honestly. When I got home from a trip, were you genuinely happy to see me or just relieved there was money coming in? When you hugged me at night, was it because you really wanted to be close, or because that's what was expected of a wife?" "That's not fair," she murmured, tears falling silently. "You're oversimplifying everything." "Maybe," I agreed. "But the truth isn't usually complicated, Sarah. The truth is, you stayed with me out of convenience, and I stayed with you because I clung to an illusion. We both deserve more than that." She was silent for a long time, her fingers tracing the rim of her coffee cup. When she finally spoke, her voice was defeated. "What happened to you, Mike? You used to fight for us." "I grew up," I replied simply. "I learned that fighting for something that isn't real is just exhaustion disguised as loyalty." The next morning, we boarded a flight to Denver. Sitting side by side, we felt like strangers, cordial, but distant. I noticed her checking her makeup in a compact mirror, nervously adjusting her necklace, her eyes wandering around the plane as if looking for someone watching us. Little habits that I once found charming now seemed like signs of deep insecurity. In Denver, I stayed in a hotel, turning down any invitation to return to our home. In the days that followed, we met with lawyers, signed papers, divided our property. It was surprisingly smooth. Sarah, realizing my decision was final, took on a practical attitude that reminded me why we'd worked so well together. When everything was laid out, she knew just how to play the cards she had. On the eve of my departure, she asked to meet one last time. She chose a small cafe we used to go to in the early years of our marriage. When I got there, she was already waiting, wearing a dress I had given her on our last wedding anniversary. "I really tried to love you the way you deserved," she said as soon as I sat down. Maybe not in the right way, but I tried. There was a sincerity in her tone that caught me by surprise. For a brief moment, I saw the girl I fell in love with, honest, vulnerable, human. "I know," I replied, my voice unexpectedly gentle. "And I truly believed we had something special." "Maybe we did, in the beginning." She nodded, a small, sad smile on her lips. "In the beginning, yes. Before real life got in the way." We talked for almost 2 hours. No accusations, no manipulation, just two people acknowledging that they'd been on different paths for a long time. When we finally stood up to leave, Sarah hugged me briefly. "I hope you find what you're looking for, Mike," she said, her familiar scent bringing up memories that no longer stung as much. "I already have," I answered honestly. "I found myself." As I walked back to the hotel, I felt a weight finally lift off my shoulders. It wasn't anger or bitterness, those feelings had faded months ago. It was something deeper, older, the need for approval, for external validation, for proving my worth through someone else's love. I went back to Millbrook with a sense of closure I'd never felt before. My friends asked how the reunion went, and I surprised even myself with my calm and honest answers. There was no more bitterness, only clarity. At Crossroads, Ray raised his glass to me. To the man who faced his demons and came back to tell the story, he toasted with that characteristic, enigmatic smile. That night, sitting on my porch, I thought about everything I'd learned from that whirlwind of events that had started with cruel words overheard at the foot of a staircase. The first big lesson was about the difference between love and convenience. Love is resilient, it finds a way to express itself even in the toughest situations. Convenience, on the other hand, is fragile, it falls apart at the first sign of trouble. Sarah didn't stay with me for love, she stayed because I represented stability. And when I disappeared, her life got more complicated, not less empty. I also noticed the signs I'd ignored for so long. Disaffection doesn't just pop up out of nowhere, it shows in small gestures, a rushed kiss, an unenthusiastic hug, shallow conversations. When someone truly loves, these things are natural, not forced. The body never lies, like Ray wisely reminded me. And Sarah's body had long since stopped responding to mine with real warmth. But the deepest lesson was about self-worth. For years, I measured my value by Sarah's approval, always seeking her love, her gratitude, her affection. I worked longer hours, drove longer distances, all in an effort to feel worthy of her love. I never stopped to wonder if she deserved more than I was giving, I accepted the scraps of affection as if they were feasts. In Millbrook, far from everything I knew, I discovered that my worth didn't depend on someone else's validation. I learned to enjoy my own company, trust my instincts, and follow my interests without worrying if they were interesting enough to impress someone. Life is too short to live halfway. Every day I spent pretending not to notice Sarah's distance was a day wasted. Every night I fell asleep next to someone who could hardly stand me was a night I could have spent figuring out who I really am, what I really want. A few months after I got back from Denver, Frank offered me a partnership at the grocery store. "I need someone I can trust when I finally retire," he said, as if it were the most natural thing, "and you've got your feet firmly on the ground like few I've met." I accepted his offer. The thought of putting down roots, of belonging somewhere, no longer scared me. In 1 year, Millbrook became more of a home to me than Denver had in 10. Here, people knew me for who I was, not for what I could provide. Sometimes, I still think about Sarah. Not with anger or bitterness, but with a kind of far-off understanding. She was also a victim of her own insecurities, of her inability to face the truth. I hope one day she finds the courage to be honest with herself about what she really wants in life, about who she really is when she isn't busy trying to fit into someone else's expectations. For me, I learned that true love, whether for someone else or for yourself, starts with honesty. And sometimes, you have to lose everything to find what really matters. 3 years have passed since that night that changed the course of my life. The grocery store is now called Frank and Mike's, and my beard has a few grey hairs by now. My apartment is still simple, but the walls are now decorated with photos of new friends, new places, new memories. Recently, I got an email from Sarah. She's engaged again, to an accountant she met at a yoga retreat. Her tone was friendly, almost casual, like she was just updating an old friend. I replied, wishing her sincere happiness. And the most surprising part? I truly meant what I wrote. If you're wondering if I ever found new love, the answer is, not yet. Maybe someday. I'm in no hurry. I've learned that the emptiness many try to fill desperately with relationships can actually be an opportunity for self-discovery and growth. Sometimes, I think about what would have happened if I hadn't come home that fateful night, if I hadn't overheard that conversation. I'd probably still be living in the same illusion, believing I had a rock-solid marriage while ignoring all the obvious signs. Would that really be better? Living happily in ignorance instead of facing a painful truth? I don't think so. The truth, as hard as it is, always sets us free. Maybe not immediately, there might be pain, confusion, even despair at first. But eventually, the truth paves the way for a more authentic life. And you? Have you ever been in a similar situation? Have you stayed in a relationship out of convenience or fear of being alone? Ignored obvious signs that something was wrong, choosing to believe an illusion instead of reality? If so, I want you to know you're not alone. Thousands of people spend years, even their entire lives, in relationships where they're merely tolerated, not truly loved. They stay out of fear, comfort, or a lack of courage to face the unknown. But I also want you to know there's a way out. Recognizing your own worth is the first step toward a fuller life. A temporary loneliness is infinitely better than a lifetime of empty company. If my story resonated with you in any way, share your own experiences in the comments. Maybe your words will be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. And if this video helped you see things differently, consider subscribing to the channel for more real stories about relationships, personal growth, and self-worth. Remember, you deserve to be more than just convenient for someone. You deserve to be essential, to be valued, to be truly loved. And if that's not happening in your life right now, maybe it's time to do what I did, take a brave step into the unknown. Subscribe to the channel and leave your like to get access to more stories like this. Because, in the end, I discovered that the unknown wasn't as scary as I thought. It was just the start of a life that was finally my own. And that, my friends, is worth every moment of uncertainty, every tear shed, every necessary goodbye. Thank you for listening to my story. Until next time.